All right, you may have noticed I am not Rodney Myers. This is Rodney Myers here, but my name is Colin Conner. I'm a senior pastoral major at Ambassador Baptist College, and I head up our missions prayer band here. And Brother Myers has been known to do these 5 for 5 videos with GFF missionaries, and it was about time that he got one himself. So he is the general director at Gospel Furthering Fellowship. And tell me a little bit about that. What ministry had you done before that, and how'd you get into GFF?
So I am privileged to have been a church planting missionary with GFF in Tanzania, East Africa, for about 13 plus years. And just about 2 years ago, the Lord called us back to the United States, and I became the general director of GFF at that time.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit about your family.
Sure, love to talk about my family. My wife and I have been married for 21 years, got married in 1998. We have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. We went to the mission field with the 2 boys. They were ages 4 and 2 at that time. We had 2 girls while we were serving on the field. Presently, both my sons are in Bible college, and my 2 girls are still being homeschooled by mom and loving it and looking forward to enjoying the rest of life. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. And about how many missionaries does GFF have right now?
We have 12 active family units serving throughout the world.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I think the general idea is the same. We have 5 questions and about a minute apiece to answer them. So we'll just start off here with one. What would you say, related to missions, is the difference between a burden and a calling, maybe to a particular field or people group or ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that's asked often, especially in the Bible college setting. Really, it's not as difficult as what it sounds. There's a lot of people who have pontificated about it, but the way that you can divide it up is you understand that a calling is to a position. A position like in the Old Testament, prophet, priest, or king. In the New Testament, an apostle of Christ, which is no longer in existence, so now you have the pastor. So a calling is to a position. And then when he's called to that position, like what 1 Timothy 3 tells us, you can have a burden for that position as well. If any man desires the office of bishop, desires a good work. But you also have like 15 qualifications. And so a burden doesn't qualify you for anything. And out of all of those qualifications that you have listed there, only one of them has to do with ability, and that's apt to teach. All the rest of them have to do with character and blamelessness. And so a burden, it's really tricky. A burden is you got to be careful about, because anyone can be burdened about anything and say it's from the Lord, and then that be their reason for going on to do something. Maybe right, maybe wrong, but you can't trust your heart on that. Yeah, a burden always has to be backed up with qualifications and always a calling from the Lord. One extra thing I would like to say about calling to a position, is like what we have with the Apostle Paul. The Lord obviously called him to salvation and to a position all at the same time on the road to Damascus. But then he led him along the way. And so when you are called into a position, what you really want to do is seek to deepen your relationship with God, seek to be content with what he's done with you and what he is going to do with you as you live the surrendered life. Then he will lead you like he did the Apostle Paul. But look at the way they led the Apostle Paul. He was the Apostle Paul went to Antioch, and even before Antioch, he was in Arabia before he ever went to do the rest of his missionary calling. So that's what I would answer. How I'd answer that.
Yeah. And I think missions in general is a way that you can still reach out to that burden while you're doing God's calling. Because you might not necessarily reach out to everywhere you have a burden. You might have 50 different burdens,
Absolutely.
But there are other people who are going there, and you can help them.
That's true.
Maybe in some ways.
I agree. Amen.
This is one that I had, I guess, thought of when I was a little bit younger and had thought this way. But what would you say for a reason for either being a missionary or supporting a missionary in a country where there's already a good one? Like when I was younger, I would think, I would see a missionary come in, say, to Mexico, and we already had a good missionary there. I thought, why do we need another one? Why is that so important still?
Yeah, that is important. Let me give you some statistics concerning that help to put things in perspective. 95% of ministerial workforce is ministering to 5% of the world's population. in the United States, which leaves 5% to reach 95% of the world, or 7 billion people. The truth of the matter is that 95% of the Christian workers trained in the U.S. for ministry stay in the U.S. for ministry. Now think about this. There are 193 recognized countries in the world. 85% of the remaining 5% are only in a total of about 15 countries throughout the rest of the world besides the United States.
Wow.
Okay? That means that 15% of the 5% are spread out among some of the remaining 178 countries throughout the world. So what you're hinting at is actually very, very important. Do I want to continue to be a light burning in a land flooded with lights, or do I want to be that one light or two lights shining in a country that has no light? And so I think each person who has a burden for missions has to consider strongly the possibility that the Lord may want them to go to an unreached people group, a people group that has no gospel witness, or has a gospel witness that is not the gospel, it's another gospel. But consider this secondly. I think you have to look at your gifting personally. Are you a great second man? Can you augment someone else's ministry in a way that can help make that ministry more effective? If all we have are single missionary units in a country of 10 to 15 million people, then isolation, loneliness, ineffectiveness tends to set in to that missionary family, and they tend to stay less on the field, not because they're not needed there or because they feel like they can't continue in ministry there, but because literally their light is burning out because of not having the type of encouragement and support to continue. So I don't think that there's any missionary serving anywhere in the world right now outside the United States who would say, we have enough missionaries here, or don't come to my country.
Right.
I've got these 30 million people tied up, no problem.
Right.
So just go back to that calling of the Lord and see what he says.
Yes. Yeah, that's important. Neat how that tied together too.
Yeah.
This one I'd ask, would you say, as you've looked at particularly people my age who are looking to go out into ministry and especially missions, that there's anything that they may do or not do that you would say, if they do that, they'll probably be a success, or if they don't, they might not? Like, for example, maybe if they're not giving to missions already before they go as a missionary, that they might not be as successful. Has there been anything you've seen like that?
Yeah, I would say that my scope of understanding is going to be more so about myself and my family.
Sure.
How I've discipled my children growing up, how the Lord led me. Being the general director, I only have 2 years experience. I think that if I look more so towards the way the Lord's dealt with us, I've always found that the principle, I think it's found in Luke, where the Lord talks about being faithful in the little things. Sure. Luke 16:10, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. That's definitely the principle that you want to go at. If there's someone or yourself, talking about yourself, and you find it a struggle to be a witness to people right now, if you find it a struggle to run to your Bible and meditate on God's Word and pour your heart to God in prayer concerning missions, concerning what can you do right now, if you find it a struggle to sacrificially give, then I'm going to tell you 2 things about that. Number one, that's a good thing because it means you're struggling. If you're not struggling, then you're content with being selfish. But if you're struggling with it, stick with the struggle and overcome. Okay? Secondly, the second thing I need to tell you about that is that you're always going to struggle. You're always going to struggle with those things. You know why? Because we're fearful people. And we fear, am I going to be able to pay the bills enough for this month when I have 4 kids and we're 40% under support? Am I going to, how is this person going to respond to me if I witness to him while I'm serving on the mission field? And so the struggle is always going to be there, but the second thing is always get the victory. Let love swallow your fear. All right, that really is the thing to do. I want to say one more thing about that, which I think is important. We need to have grace for people and that is the fact that sometimes right now when we're Bible college, Colin, is that we don't have a lot of time, and the Lord has called young people like yourself primarily at this time in your life to be college students. You need to be faithful, and if you are being faithful to your studies, faithful to your classes, faithful to work, which is paying for your classes, you're being faithful in what you can do, prayer, Bible study, and in giving and things like that. Don't kick yourself or be too hard on yourself or others because you don't spend 2 or 3 hours on Saturday or Sunday doing extra witnessing. You witness when you can. You got to go to Walmart. You got to go to McDonald's. You got to go to Subway. You can be a witness along the way, but don't kick yourself up about that. Like I said, Paul went to Arabia for 3.5 years before he went to Asia.
Yeah. All
right. So be faithful with where the Lord has put you for that time.
And that's encouraging because being faithful is something each of us can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely. This question you actually kind of inspired here at the missions conference last week. Someone brought up a missions trip. Yeah. I know a lot of college students like to go on missions trips and help out missionaries, and that's good. But what would you say are maybe some aspects of that we don't think of when we're going on the field? What would be helpful to them? Sure.
Well, let me preface just by saying that the Lord, 100% convinced the Lord called me to go to Tanzania, East Africa, as a missionary. I had never been on a mission trip in my entire life. My wife had never been on a mission trip either. But the Lord called me to go based on the fact that I began praying for a specific country and a specific tribe. And then the Lord, having burdened me to pray for them, 2 years later, the Lord answered that prayer, and I'm sure the prayers of hundreds of others, for us to surrender to go to that field. That all happened without a mission trip. A mission trip is only ever a tool or a catalyst to help young people to determine whether God has called them to the mission field or not. It could be helpful for other reasons. But a couple of things that I took note on here. The most important thing to consider when preparing for a mission trip is how is it going to affect the missionary that you're going to go and visit. And you need to put him in a position where he can feel like he's able to answer honestly, rather than answer in a way that's not respectful towards the person asking or whatever. So making it totally up to him. Is it going to be a benefit to him? Is it going to be a burden? Because mission trips always interrupt life schedules and ministry schedules. And the people who go away with the most benefit from a mission trip are usually those who came on it and not necessarily the nationals on the field. There's a lot to consider concerning language struggles, cultural struggles, and then the interruption to the normal ministry schedule by having guests that you're tending to as a missionary. So you really need to reach out to that missionary and find out. Smaller groups, always better than bigger groups. Because if you're a smaller group, 1, 2, or 3, you can shadow that missionary rather than have to be placed in the forefront. And that makes it more about the ministry and less about you. Yeah. Secondly, always be looking for ways to serve around the house and ministry when you're on a mission trip instead of sitting back and waiting to be served.
Great. And the last one for today is, what would you say is the most important consideration, maybe 1 or 2 of them, when choosing a mission board to partner with?
Great question. This really is the question of the hour in the age that we live in. I believe the most important consideration is that of doctrine and philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I think that the number one issue right after doctrine are these 3 principles. All right? Number 1, does that mission board believe in targeting through evangelism the conscience of the sinner first and not their societal circumstances? Okay? Many times missionaries, first thing they ask when they get to the field, and I think they do it wrong, it's a disservice to missions, it's a disservice to the scriptures, is what can I help with societally in order to earn the right to share the gospel. But what we see all throughout the New Testament, especially with Christ, is that he goes straight to the conscience. And so evangelism strikes first at the sinner's conscience. The second principle is that is that mission board planting churches from inception to be independent in name and nature and or is it just an eventual goal that they hope to have? Way too many missionaries in independent Baptist circles are starting dependent Baptist churches on the mission field, either by accident or on purpose, and I believe that that's a disservice. You need to know what is happening with that mission board. And the third principle is does this mission board believe that using reproducible patterns for nationals is important, so that they rely on their own faith and funds for complete ministry? If a missionary goes in and he brings in every type of resource along with him that is not able to be used by the national or reproduced by the national in that society by that local to them local church, not by your local church back in the States, but that local to them local ministry, then you're setting up the nationals for failure, because they're looking to you to set the pattern for how they're going to be church planters, evangelistic, and so on. And so if you have to have hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of resources available to you, you're setting them up for failure. And so I would say look for a mission board who believes in these three principles, and or at least looks to you and say, well, most of our missionaries don't follow that principle, but we are not going to hold you back from following those principles. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Very good.
All that has been great. So thank you very much. It's been a 5 for 5 with Brother Rodney Myers, General Director of Gospel Furthering Fellowship out of Pennsylvania. And remember, ministry, even in college, is not worth doing unless done with integrity.
Amen.
Almost
Thank you,
got it
brother.
out.
You got it. Thank you, brother.